Today is the 8th day of the month of Cheshvan. We are in the middle of chapter 9 discussing the laws of Tzitzis and Tallis. Today we will be finishing the chapter going from paragraph 15 through 21. Paragraph 15. What happens if the tzitzis garment gets torn in half? Can you just sew it back together? Let's say a piece of the corner gets torn off. Could you just sew it back on? The answer is that it depends on the tear, how big the tear was, where the tear was, etc. It gets quite technical and complicated, so we're not going to go into the rules, but if it does happen, before just sewing it back up or putting it back together, speak to a rabbi first. Paragraphs 16 and 17 discuss more cases of different types of tears, so we are going to jump to paragraph 18. Paragraph 18. Let's say your tzitzis is fine, the garment is fine at least, but the strings are starting to get a little bit worn, a little bit dirty, and you want to have a nice looking pair of tzitzis or a nice looking tallis, so you want to replace the strings on the tallis or tzitzis. Is that okay, or is it not appropriate to replace a mitzvah object if you don't have to? The answer is that it's totally fine. If you want to replace the strings on your tzitzis or tallis, you could do it. Make sure you're doing it properly, or you're having somebody who knows how to do it for you. But there's no problem of removing old strings from your tallis and tzitzis just to have nicer ones. Now, what do you do with those old strings? Are we allowed to just throw them out in the garbage? So the answer is the best thing to do with the tzitzis strings is to bury them. Any paper which has God's name written on it, which has verses from the Torah written on it, any Torah books are not supposed to be thrown out. We put it into what we call shemus or geniza, and we bury them. So the tzitzis strings should also, if possible, should be put into that collection to be buried. But if for whatever reason that's complicated, we're allowed to dispose of them other ways. We can't just throw them in the garbage can because that would be considered disgraceful to the tzitzis. But we could put it in a bag and put it next to our garbage. When the garbage men come, then they'll take that bag along with the rest of the garbage. We're not supposed to directly put it into the garbage, but we could leave it next to the garbage as long as it's in a separate bag, knowing that it will eventually end up with the rest of the garbage. This is like a few steps removed from throwing it into the garbage ourselves. Paragraph 19. What about if the tzitzis strings got torn and they're no longer valid, so you have to replace them because the tzitzis strings that you have are not kosher for tzitzis anymore? Then could you just throw them out? The answer is no still. They were used for a mitzvah. It's not appropriate just to throw it in the garbage. So the rules that we said about kosher tzitzis strings also apply to non-kosher tzitzis strings. Here the Cheshvan gives an idea of what to do with it. You could do this even for kosher tzitzis strings that you're not using anymore. It's maybe some people use it as a bookmark for a Jewish book to study Torah with, so you're now using it for another mitzvah. But the way we talked about getting rid of the strings in paragraph 18, you could do in 19 as well. What about the garment? So you have old pair of tzitzis that you took off the tzitzis strings for whatever reason. Now what do you do with the garment that had the strings attached to them? These you don't have to be as meticulous about as the strings, because the strings are the actual mitzvah itself. The garment had a mitzvah attached to it, but the strings are the tzitzis. So the garment you could throw out. We're not allowed to turn it into just a rag and start using it to mop up spills with. We could throw them into the garbage without a problem. Again, it's probably appropriate to put it in a separate bag in the garbage. It shouldn't be in there with all the spoiled food and who knows what else is in there. So you put it into a bag, and once it's in a separate bag, it's fine to put it into the garbage can itself. Paragraph 20. Let's say you get to shul in the morning, and you're supposed to check your tzitzis strings beforehand to make sure that they're good to go, and you see that they're not kosher for some reason. So many shuls have extra tallises. You just want to use one of the shul's tallis. However, let's say the shul that you're in doesn't have any tallises for you to use. So if it's during the week, you're supposed to go get yourself a new tallis, go buy one from the store, go get tzitzis strings to tie on to the tallis. But let's say it happens on Shabbos morning, when you can't just go get new tzitzis. You can't just go buy a new tallis. So then there's a concept called kavod habrius. Putting tzitzis on our garments is a positive mitzvah. You should put tzitzis on your garments. There's a rabbinic prohibition of wearing a four-cornered garment without tzitzis. So if somebody would put on a tallis, which doesn't have kosher tzitzis attached to it, they're transgressing this rabbinical prohibition of thou shalt not wear a four-cornered garment without tzitzis on it. And the rabbis allowed us to do it in a case of what's called in Hebrew kavod habrius, severe embarrassment. Every other guy in shul is wearing a tallis, and you're the one person not wearing a tallis for morning services. That's a pretty embarrassing situation. So on Shabbos morning, if your tallis is not kosher for whatever reason, and you can't get another tallis to wear, you're allowed to wear your non-kosher tallis. Now this is all only if you didn't know about it until Shabbos morning. If you knew about before Shabbos began that your tallis wasn't kosher, you should have made arrangements before Shabbos to take care of it. So if you knew before Shabbos, you can't wear that tallis on Shabbos morning. If on Shabbos morning you discover it and now it's too late to do anything about it, then even though it's not a kosher tallis, you still could wear it for that one Shabbos morning. By next week, you got to make sure you get a new tallis. But for that morning, it's okay. Paragraph 21. Let's say you have an article of clothing, some sort of coat or something or other like that, and you realize, oh my goodness, this has 4 corners. This might need tzitzis. It's not so common nowadays. The case that we talked about in yeshiva was the heads of the yeshiva, and very often some of the rabbis in yeshiva, they wear a long jacket. It's called a frock, and it's split up in the back, has like a slit going up the back. So there might be 4 corners over there. It might require tzitzis. So what do you do? So option number 1, of course, is just put tzitzis on it. That's not a common thing to do. What you could do is you could round off one of the 4 corners. Now that it's round, if you cut it off and take scissors, really literally cut it off and round it out, now it doesn't have 4 corners anymore. It's only got 3 corners. It would not need tzitzis no matter what. However, if you merely fold over the corner and sew it down, even if you fold it over in a way that's rounded, if you fold it over, just bend the corner back, like folding back the corner of it. So now you might end up with 5 corners. And remember, we learned that a 5-cornered garment also needs tzitzis. So just folding back the corner wouldn't help. Even if you fold it back like a lot of small folds and you round it out with folds and sew it all down, still that wouldn't help because it's already called a 4-corner garment. You now have to actually cut it off to round it out to get rid of the title 4-cornered garment. And this concludes Chapter 9, the laws of Tzitzis and Tallis, as well as today's episode. Have a great day and see you on the next episode.